Hello, everybody. Ryker Richard here. Just as we are now into the start of the NBA season, Ben is in the start of the exam season. So he's not on the pod today. Be back for probably the next pod. We're talking today about, will Kyle Lowry have his best ever NBA season? Short answer is yes. It's entirely possible, I think. It's entirely possible that he will have better numbers than one of his best seasons, the 2016 season, where his stats were better than that of D. Rose's MVP year. Now, I'm not claiming that this is even remotely possible that Kyle Lowry will hail MVP, especially with a top three player, arguably top three player in the league on his team. It would be much more likely, that Kawhi Leonard would be in contention for those honors. But I do think that with the current situation, the current support system, team, roster, everything that's happened, it's all conducive to Kyle Lowry at the end of the season boasting his best stats of his career. Here's why. 1, the roster. 2, his role. And 3, what's at stake. So starting from the most obvious, the roster. First and foremost, to address the super obvious elephant in the room, it's the absence of DeMar DeRozan. Now, Double D, he was a fantastic player. He took the franchise to the absolute peak that he could, and all of the top accomplishments of the Raptors franchise have been either fully or partially credited to DeMar DeRozan, but the simple fact remains that his style of isolation basketball made it very hard for Lowry to set DeRozan up in a way that would show up consistently in the box score. Moreover, oftentimes, DeMar would be creating a scoring through his own dribble post-up moves, isolation-style basketball. It wouldn't really involve anybody else on the court except for their off-ball screens or their off-ball positioning. Now, what we'll see this year instead, with the addition of Danny Green, he's a standalone shooter or 1-2 dribble pull guy, giving Kyle Lowry multiple opportunities from the shooting guard position to get those assist numbers, and Kawhi Leonard, who for the most part doesn't command nearly as much ball time as did DeRozan. But even if he did, with the exact same amount of time, the addition of both Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green's defensive output, it's going to create more fast break opportunities, many more, I would argue, many more fast break opportunities, which will allow Kyle Lowry to facilitate on the fast break in those advantage situations. And additionally, we're seeing this year's roster become even more ready for driving kick-style offense with the removal of DeMar DeRozan and likely the limited, better or worse, likely because of the limited playing time of Jonas Valanciunas this season. This is still yet to be seen. Nick Nurse is going to be doing a lot of shuffling, but it looks as, after the first 3 games, that the roster is very conducive of 5-man out at most times. And even Serge Ibaka, who typically lives it along the three-point line, he's not being a post-up guy, he's more of a mid-range guy, but either way, we're seeing a lot of drive and kick basketball, and Kyle Lowry's stats from the assist category has been completely boosted over the past 3 games. So, all in all, it's perfectly suited to allow Lowry, as been already seen this season, to get ideally 7 to 8 plus assists per game range. Now, with his scoring, we know Lowry has the ability at any time to go absolute beast mode. And really, the most recent game that the Raptors played against, I don't know when this podcast is going to be uploaded, but the most recent game against the Washington Wizards, it was fully Lowry's confidence in playmaking, in three-point shooting, and dribble drives, and finishing contact layups. He's able to score explosively at any time he wants. The reasons for his maybe faltering in past seasons, even though he's had consistently good numbers and really solid shooting percentage, are always trickling around the high 40% and sometimes 50% in both 3-point and 2-point field goal percentages. One reason that it sometimes falters, of course, coming off injuries. He's usually not huge injuries, but slightly injury prone. If he's able to stay healthy this season, and it looks like because, you have so many guys that are willing to step up and play with Fred VanVleet and DeLon Wright, who are soon going to be, trying to fight for those number 1 point guard positions, maybe on other teams. Don't want to get too sad and talk about that, but this will allow Lowry to take rest, such as we saw with Kawhi Leonard the other day. So he should be able to be productive and stay away from injuries, fingers crossed. But moreover, confidence and demeanor on the court is usually the reason that Kyle Lowry has off games. And I think I think it's because of the general attitude of the Raptors last season, all right, and the season before. If they're playing good team basketball, such as Dwayne Casey wanted, when they're facilitating through the entire 5 players that are out on the court and shots are being made, then you can see through the body language of all the players that they have more confidence. They have those, heat check shots. They're able to make consistently buckets that you expect them to make. But when the things weren't going as well for the Raptors squad, and specifically the 2 key players, DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry, you could see oftentimes they would become deflated. They would start arguing more with the refs. They would hang their head. I think this season, and not to say that everything negative that happened with the Raptors in previous seasons was based off DeMar DeRozan, but looking at what the current roster has with the addition of Kawhi Leonard, he's a player that is never extremely expressive on the offensive end, and even if he's having a bad night, he's still able to inspire the team and contribute by crazy smothering defense. And it's the same thing that we saw last night, once again, whenever this podcast is posted, with Danny Green. He was only 1 for 9, 11% shooting from the field, but it felt like he had a fantastic game because he still played his heart out on the defensive end. And then that translated to the rest of the team still being inspired to shoot their best. So I think the absolute morale and the ability for Kyle Lowry to stay confident is going to allow him to shoot even better this season. And I think also in shifting away from really the Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan system was a 1A and 1B, not an alpha and a beta. They both share the responsibilities equally. Now we have, for certain, Kawhi Leonard is going to be the dominant face of the franchise, the number 1 player. And behind that, Kyle Lowry is second. Kyle Lowry has something to prove. Not to the fans, not to anybody, but to himself. He's a competitor. Everybody knows that he is one of the most inspired, most flamed, most intense players in the game. He has something to prove to himself that this is still his team, but also he's able to relax and take less of the burden on himself to score at every situation, and he's able to just focus on making those big shots. Next, one of the obvious criticisms, a lot of attention from the media with this before the season started was, will Kawhi Leonard and Kyle Lowry mesh together? Is Kyle Lowry going to be so resentful at the way that the whole DeMar DeRozan trade situation sort of played out, and especially with the things that happened during the offseason? It's his unhappiness and possibly unwillingness to play with Kawhi Leonard, possibly a lack of chemistry. Is that going to hold him back, make him a less player, diminish his abilities? Both of those arguments are really absurd. I mean, of course, they come from a place that skeptics were able to pick apart. Kyle Lowry dodging the calls from Ujiri and Nick Nurse during the offseason, being very avoiding all the questions about Kawhi Leonard during the press conferences and the media. He really played up that, or at least didn't allow to show in the media that he was happy with the situation. He never expressly said he was unhappy. However, people usually react into the worst. Of course, this was him and DeMar DeRozan's team. They put the city on their backs, and for the way that everything sort of rolled out, it's easy to think that Kyle Lowry might have been unhappy with the situation. Especially an article pointed out, he does hold grudges with coaching on the Houston Rockets. With a former Villanova assistant coach that he played with. I mean, there's different situations to point out where he has been resentful when people that he trusts don't do what he expects them to do. However, he's an old player now. He's a veteran. He's not old. He still has a couple years left, but he's a veteran in the league. He's matured. He's a competitor, and he's clearly not going to let this get behind him, especially on the chemistry side. All apprehensions and all doubts should have been erased during those first 2 games and the preseason games when they're running the fast break, and he's, has a wide open layup, dishes it off to Kawhi Leonard, and you see in the chemistry of the games and just the way that Kawhi Leonard can command a team. He's so low maintenance that I really don't think it's going to be an issue. And plus, you have the rest of the bench mob, and you have guys like Siakam stepping up, and you have guys like Jonas Valanciunas and Serge Ibaka who are, really determined to have their best season ahead of them. And plus, if you look ultimately as to what the goal of this Raptors franchise is, you can think of it 2 ways. One would be to ensure that Kawhi Leonard stays, to prove to him that this is a championship contending team. But more than likely, what everybody in the locker room is thinking, what every roster member is thinking is, if Kawhi Leonard is a rental, right? In worst case scenario, he only stays for one season, then the ultimate objective has to be to play for a championship. And to not be able to put, a little bit of woes aside for one season is absolutely absurd. And I think that, like I said, this entire conversation has been dismissed after the first 3 games that have already been played. We've seen all the guys go out there. We see the team flowing. The offense is flowing. The defense is going to be one of the probably best net ratings in the league when you have such fantastic wing defenders. You have really good... Well, okay, my issue is I think there might be some post-defending issues, but that's an issue for a different topic. And even Kyle Lowry. He's banged up. He has bruise under his eyes, and he's putting his heart out there, drawing those crucial charge calls. It's going to be a fantastic season, and there's no reason to think that chemistry is going to play a negative part in it. So the last point that I'll make is really the question of, what does Kyle Lowry need to prove? What does he want to prove? What are his objectives for box season stats throughout the regular season? I think to answer that question simply is, I think Kyle Lowry doesn't care at all. He has probably no thought as to what numbers he gets, what numbers he would like to get. Really, I don't think that anybody on the Toronto Raptors roster or franchise is thinking that the regular season bears any importance. I think that everybody is very much in the mindset that the playoffs is where everything matters. I mean, they can have less than 59 wins. They can have less than 50 wins. They can be just above 500. I think as long as they make the playoffs, they're confident that they can contend with any team in the Eastern Conference, and their only primary concern and objective is to reach the finals. However, with that being said, I think it's easy to imagine that Kyle Lowry can have a 24-point and 7-assist season with the way that the whole roster and situation plays out. And I think what we'll see really is that having nothing to prove in the regular season is going to allow for a more relaxed style basketball with no chip on his shoulder. I mean, he's not even the number 1 option guy anymore. He really doesn't have any stress in the regular season to put up big numbers. I think that he's just going to take on the burden as trying to improve himself, trying to better the rest of the team, the young guys, trying to really be the leader and the vocal guy that gets everything going. This is what we've seen the past couple games, is that when the offense is stagnant, he's the guy calling the plays, he's the guy making those big, tough shots. This is exactly the position that he's been working to get to in his career, and I think that he's going to take the next stride forward clearly through his gameplay and to be supportive of those numbers. I think also it's going to be a big, perhaps, transition in he's always consistently played well in the playoffs. Last season, 17 points per game, almost 9 assists per game, shooting over 50% from the field, shooting almost 45% from the 3. Those are fantastic numbers, and unfortunately, I mean, of course, LeBron being the number 1 reason that the playoff run was halted, but also the rest of the teams let Lowry down. Just simple facts. They weren't able to play at the high level. Lowry was really the only guy that was dragging a defeated and lifeless LeBron-spooked team through the horrible playoffs to watch. And I think now that if he's able to stay consistent with those numbers, to have a guy that has proven himself on the highest stage in Kawhi Leonard and being Defensive Player of the Year and shutting down all the best players in the playoffs and getting a finals win, a finals MVP, to having the best ever, probably, Raptors team assembled, there's just a lot. There's a lot of really good pieces, a lot of good puzzle pieces that are fitting together. So correct me if I'm wrong. Let me know what you guys think, but I think it's pretty easy to imagine that this could be Lowry's best ever season in terms of box score stats, and plus just in overall gameplay. You can look at the advanced metrics. I'm sure that he will be improve on all of those, and I think all of the reasons. If I've missed anything, let it out. If you think I'm completely wrong, then put me in my place. But mark my words, this will be a good season for Kyle Lowry. Thanks for hanging in if you've listened this far in the pod, and we'll see you guys after the next game. Cheers.